And I look down on the console and there are gloves and a rope and duct tape. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Right before I had gotten pregnant, I had been raped twice by different people. And I felt like God probably didn't want anything to do with me. The lies of the enemy. That until trauma therapy recently, I didn't even recognize actually either one of them as rape. He's bawling, my son's dad is bawling, holding our son. Like he's like, I thought I could come up with a way for you guys to stay. He's like, I just can't afford it yet. And it was heartbreaking. And my seatbelt didn't lock because I had been turned around. So my head went through a windshield. That's when that big cloud of darkness just came over me. Like, my son's gone. I can't go see him because he's a mile across the hospital. I'm in too much pain. And I know he's not going home with me.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had any trauma in your life? The dictionary defines trauma as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Maybe you're a veteran and have experienced the horrors of war. Maybe you've been in an accident or seen something extremely disturbing. Perhaps you've been bullied. Maybe you've been physically or emotionally abused. Have you ever experienced divorce, death of a family member? Maybe you've experienced the tragedy of losing a child. Or maybe you've been raped or robbed of your innocence. Where has this kind of trauma taken you emotionally? Has it impacted your relationships? Is there any kind of relief from these kind of events? Does God even care that these things have happened? And can He bring healing to my broken life? These are topics that I want to discuss with our guest today as she shares the second half of her life change story with us. If you haven't listened to the last episode, I want to encourage you to do so. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. Previously on the last episode.
She said, I got the part. I went back the next day. She said, we gave it to someone else. You're too heavy to lift. Not saying anything doesn't work. Trying to tell them what's wrong doesn't work. So I'm going to start restricting my food. So that'll make me different on the outside. Then maybe people will accept me. I started starving myself freshman year of high school completely. I did believe that I was too fat no matter what I did after a while. It didn't matter how much I lost or what other people would say. And that started the addiction to heroin, which eventually became injectable heroin. I knew I needed to change, but at the same time, that voice saying, you're worthless, you're a burden, look what you've done, the shame, the guilt, that was as close to hell as I probably could have been. My mom's like, get in the car, we're going to NA. I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do. You can throw a fit, you can scream, you can hit me, but we're carrying you out to the car. We don't care what you do. You're not going to do this anymore. So I went in and I never used again after that. Not ever. And that was 17 years ago. So March 7th, 2007 is when that's my clean date.
And now the rest of Tyra's story.
I stayed clean and sober for a year. I was doing college courses, and then I made another dumb decision. It has nothing to do with drugs. I've been clean since then, but I started talking to this guy that I was in band with in high school, and he lived in California, and we were talking for a few months, and I'm like, well, I'm done for the semester. After this, and he's like, well, you should come visit. And so I did that. And then he's like, well, you should come live here. And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, you had such an awesome time. Like, you really should. And there's a room for rent open. I'm like, well, I can breathe here. My asthma's, I don't have to use any of my allergy or asthma medication. Um, I love the sunshine. My depression's better. And he was there, of course. So I came home, I packed all my stuff. I ended up moving there in 2010, um, which my parents, both of them said, we're never talking to you again if you do this. I did it anyway because it was a safe place, and I knew I could afford the rent because the lady had made it cheap enough for me to do that. So I lived out there for 5 years.
So you met this guy that you used to go to high school with, and you liked him. You moved into this house with him, but it was a group house. It was you were in a separate room and everything, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and your parents didn't want you to do that because they didn't want you to move all the way to California, or what were they
Well,
fearful
they
of?
thought I was making irrational decisions
Okay.
because they always have.
Okay.
My mom has never trusted my decision making. I mean, when I was using in my eating disorder, I wouldn't have, but I had been sober a year, but she's still, it's probably some of the trust thing. But he wasn't a drug addict or anything. Um, but she also didn't want that loss of control.
Right.
Um, but I was happy there. I thought then we ended up not being able to work things out. So I moved to my own apartment, so I could actually be on my own, pay for my own apartment. I used to walk everywhere. I would still go to meetings. And I just tried to start learning about who I was. But then that boyfriend and I dated off and on. And then we ended up dating, like getting together again. Um, but then I got pregnant.
Mm.
Um, I didn't believe in sex before marriage ever. Um, but then after the boyfriend thing, in high school, I thought I'm damaged. And then after I got divorced, I thought if anyone will have me, that's just what it means. If we have to do this or that, that's what it means. Even though the shame would come with it. I just thought, well, that's what people do, I guess. It's when I needed to be talking to God more than I was. I would go to church out there, but not as often as I used to. Right before I had gotten pregnant, I had been raped twice by different people. And I felt like God probably didn't want anything to do with me. The lies of the enemy.
So let me stop you real quick. You mentioned something that I just can't blow by. You said you were raped twice. Did they ever catch the guys that did this? I mean, did you go to the police, or did you just, gosh, that's a horrible traumatic events. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I think I was 30 or 31, the first one, maybe 30. Yeah. And I was getting a massage, and he was a masseuse. And I was on my stomach, and I felt something, and I was just in shock. I was like, there's no one else here. He's stronger than me. I don't know what to do. And I thought maybe I was just imagining things. You hope that you are. But then it started feeling different, and I ended up, you know, sliding up and putting the cover over me and saying, yeah, thanks for the massage. It doesn't, I need to stop now. I'm tired. Or so, I don't remember what I said, but he left, and then I went to the police, took him, my clothing, told him the guy's name. He was staying with my next door neighbors because he was their nephew, the mom's nephew. And they're like, okay, well, the next day they call me, there's nothing on your clothing, you know. And then I went and talked to my next door neighbor and told them, well, they said, this must just be a misunderstanding. You know, he's a massage therapist. He would never do that. And then they end up calling me over later on that evening with him there, all around the table, and telling me, you know, and then they go into telling me what my truth is and what he said happened, which he said nothing happened. And they're like, so we all agree it's a misunderstanding, right? And I was in shock. I didn't even know what you were supposed to do, and I didn't tell anyone.
So you didn't get a rape kit. You did. They didn't check you for rape then.
Not at the police station. They called me the next day or a few days later and said, we didn't find anything on your clothing. And we just wanted to say, you should probably just go ahead now and drop the case because you're going to lose. It's going to be his word against yours. And I mean, they're probably going to believe him. And I thought, oh, okay. And then I thought, well, if the police aren't going to help me, then I guess, you know, for a long time, I told myself, well, maybe it was nothing. And then the next one happened, I believe I was 32, 31 or 32. They weren't very far apart. And this one was a stranger. And I was sitting at the gas station. It was like Halloween, I think. And I was really depressed right then. I don't remember what had happened, but it's almost like I just didn't care about a lot right then. And I was just sitting on the curb. I was going to get a drink before I walked back to my house, which was it was like a few blocks away. He pulls up beside me. He's like, hey, you know what? You're so beautiful. Do you model by chance? And I was like, yeah, I do some modeling. Why? Oh, well, I'm a photographer and I'm looking for like this perfect model, you know, and you look exactly like the one. I can either give you my number or I don't know if the position will be filled by then, but I get in, he drives off, and as we're going, I'm like, so where is your place? Oh, it's just right over here. Then we just keep going. And I look down on the console and there are gloves and a rope and duct tape. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and then it hit me. I'm like, this is not what you thought it was. The car doors are locked. The only person who can unlock them is him because the car's moving. So he keeps driving. And I'm like, so I thought you said it was just over this way. He's like, oh yeah, well, it's just a little bit further. And so he starts going down this dark alley, gravel, and I'm like, okay, here it is. You know, this is my end right now. And he pulls into an empty, vacant lot, and he's like, okay, you know, you need to do this and this, or else I'm not taking you back. And then my mom, everyone was like, well, you asked for it. You shouldn't have been sitting out there at night. You shouldn't have gotten in the car. You shouldn't have done this. And
so did you never report him to the police or any of that?
No, I went home. I was just done. I hated myself so much at that time, and I had no faith in justice. And so I was like, I just can't. And so I just laid in my room and cried for the rest of the night and the next day. And that, until trauma therapy recently, I didn't even recognize actually either one of them as rape. So my counselor was like, why don't you consider those? She's like, let me put it this way. If your best friend was sitting here right now and they said, well, this happened, would you tell them that that was not rape? And I said, no. She's like, okay, so why do you think that about you? I said, I don't know. I just blame myself for everything. She's like, and that's something we got to work on.
Well, I'm so sorry that happened to you, and that's a horrible, traumatic thing. And you said PTSDs earlier, and I can understand why you have. I mean, you've got any one of these things, these events in your life would cause those kind of things. So you're pregnant. You're in California. You got the boyfriend. Did you decide to move back to Illinois at that point? Did you have the baby in California, and did you stay together with your boyfriend?
So after I told him I was pregnant on the phone, he like passed out because the doctors had said you won't have children because of your eating disorder. You know, you did a lot of damage. You stopped menstruating. There's just no way. And then I had my endometriosis collared. And then like 6 months later, I was pregnant. So I don't know. He thought that I had been lying the whole time. And his family started telling him that I was just, I was a liar. I had cheated. It wasn't really his. And I don't know why he chose to believe them, but he dropped off the map. So it's basically my child and I. He ghosted me, if you will, after he found out I was pregnant. He went to the first ultrasound and still in shock. I'm like, is there anything in there? And he's like, yeah. Because, you know, you're told you can't get pregnant and then there's this child. So I spent the entire time until 8 months on my own, living with a family, another room for rent, but they were all Vietnamese. So it's like I learned some Vietnamese at that time. But they would always be like, you eat, baby more important, you know, and they would try to encourage me to take care of myself, which was great. Then at 8 months, all of a sudden decides to text me and says, well, I guess we'll move you in here. And I'm thinking, what? What do you mean? And he's like, I don't want you to be alone when you're having the baby. And I was thinking, but you wanted me to be alone pregnant. You know, I had all this anger toward him because it really was unacceptable. So I ended up moving in there. I have the baby out there in Newport Beach. My son was born, you know, no problems. He was beautiful, you know, beautiful blue eyes. And when I looked at him, I thought, that's what love is. You know, that's what love is. Because I hadn't really known it before, except from my grandma, but it was a different kind of love. You know, it was me loving someone else.
Yeah.
And so, but I did end up moving back home when he was a month old, because my son's dad and my mom said, I'm not going to help you out anymore with Aaron or anything else if you don't move home. Another control thing.
So you moved back to Illinois with your mom and your stepdad?
Without my boyfriend, yeah.
Right. So you've got your child, single mom, moved back there, right?
Okay. Yeah, and he's bawling. You know, my son's dad is bawling, holding our son. Like, he's like, I thought I could come up with a way for you guys to stay. He's like, I just can't afford it yet. And it was heartbreaking because I knew what I was moving back to, you know, same house, same control, same everything, but I had a baby, you know. But I also, you know, we weren't able to buy groceries and I was breastfeeding. So, and she knew that. So that's what we did.
Mm. So let's go back onto you're back at home with your mom and your stepdad with your newborn child. So, what happened next? I mean, you know, and you told me your son is now like 9, or is that what you said?
He'll be 10 in a few weeks.
Yeah. So give me what happened after you moved back with your mom and your stepdad? Did you just remain a single parent, or what happened?
He was amazing. He never wanted to be put down though. He always cried as soon as I'd lay him down. And it wasn't like, you know, a lot of babies will do. You put them down and then it takes him a minute. It was as soon as he felt you start to put him down. We didn't know at that time it was sensory processing disorder. So I tried to stay in contact with my son's dad, but he was upset with me. You know, he felt like I had given up. And plus he was depressed because his son wasn't there anymore. Um, but then I went to visit his dad, because his dad's brother was getting married. I went with his mom. And we decided we would try again. I come back here. I go back again to visit him with just us. And the last day that we were there, my friend was driving and a car pulled out in front of her, getting ready to take us home, you know, to the airport. And I was whipped around because my son was crying. I turn around, we're driving into a car, and my seatbelt didn't lock because I had been turned around. So my head went through a windshield when we crashed. That I saw PTSD from that because my son was crying and I was like stunned, or, you know, I mean, I had a concussion, so who knows what was up with that, but there was smoke. I mean, there was the oil dripping, and my son screaming. And so I still have flashbacks of that. And so that was really hard. And then his dad drives to the hospital.
So was that in California or was that in Illinois?
California. I went to visit his dad because we decided to work things out.
Oh, okay.
And he decided that he was going to move here. So he moved in here.
Illinois.
Yeah.
Okay.
Until he could get a job in Illinois. And that's when my son's sensory processing started showing. Like, he stopped talking after the accident, completely stopped.
Okay,
No words.
so do you think the accident hurt your son then?
I
Or
used
damaged?
to.
Okay.
I don't think it helped because it was trauma.
Right.
But he's autistic. You know, his dad's on the spectrum, which his dad is not diagnosed, but he didn't find out until Aaron started showing his symptoms. But my son went from ages 2 to 4 and didn't talk. I blamed myself for a really long time because of the accident. I wasn't driving, you know, but when I got home, my mom's like, well, you shouldn't have been out there anyway, because she didn't want me to go visit my son's dad. And it just, see, it's my fault. It's my fault. And that's part of the memory loss, by the way, is PTSD plus, you know, my brain.
Yeah.
But he lived here until my son was about 3 or 4. But then I told him to leave because he was being verbally abusive. He has, you know, now we know that he gets overstimulated and he goes into fight or flight. But then it just looked like, you're abusive. You know, I'm not putting up with your abusive behavior. But it's still abusive either way. And he'd been too hard on Aaron a few times. And I said, I'm not doing this. It's a trigger. And plus, he's my son. You need to go figure this out. We can't live together, especially with my mom, who doesn't like you. I mean, I didn't say that part, but they didn't like each other. And that was toxic too. And so he was very angry with me. But I was actually pregnant again when I kicked him out. Throughout the pregnancy after he left, I was thinking, you know, my sister can't have children. She's infertile. And even though I didn't want to give my son away, my older son's autism started showing then. And it was a 24/7 thing. He had therapy 3 days a week. You know, we had to do feeding play and therapies at home. And my son's dad was not really much help during that time at all. And so I wanted both sons to have a mom. Um, I ended up starting to talk to my son's dad again toward the latter part of the pregnancy. I let him know what was going on, you know, because that was his son. And I also prayed about the decision to give my sister my son as a gift. You know, not as like I can't do this, I'm sorry, because it was the hardest decision I've ever made. He was born a couple days before he was supposed to be. Like, I started bleeding. I remember one of them saying, "Okay, she's losing blood. We got to get him out of here." I waited until my son cried, and then I was like passed out. I woke up, and that's when that big cloud of darkness just came over me. Like, my son's gone. I can't go see him because he's a mile across the hospital. I'm in too much pain. Um, and I know he's not going home with me. And my sister's like, you know, they gave him a shot of insulin when he came out, and he had a seizure and he has brain damage now. So I went 5 days before I saw my son. I finally made it over there, and he, you know, you can hold him. He was precious. I mean, was so beautiful. And my sister, I noticed when I went in there that she had not left his side, not to shower, not to eat. And I was like, that was the right decision. You know, thank you, God, because in tears, I had prayed every night, you know, give me a sign, give me some kind of sign. And so I knew it was the right thing to do. But when I came home from the hospital, my son was in the NICU for a month total. Over time, they found out he has cerebral palsy. He's blind. He does not talk. He does not walk. He can't sit unassisted. He has a feeding tube. He aspirates if he laughs too much. Or just anyway, he's almost died quite a few times. But my sister's a nurse, is the other thing. So she's always right there. And my two boys, when they're together, they overstimulate each other because they both have sensory things. So you have to separate them on the end of the house. I'm like, that never would have worked. Never would have worked.
But you still get to be a part of his life, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I told my sister in the beginning, I said, I want to do this for you, and he is going to be your son. I said, I will never not think of him as my child because he came from me and I love him, but you were his mom. I said, but I want Aaron and Elijah, my sons, to know that they are brothers. That's before I knew that my youngest son probably doesn't really know too much, but he is very smart considering, you know.
Yeah.
After I had my first son, I had terrible postpartum depression. But then after I had my second son, there was postpartum depression and just that darkness. So I was in bed just crying for months, you know, and I'm like, I've got to get up for my other son. You know, he would come play with me in the bedroom in bed. I was like, this can't go on. And I was overeating. I went from one end to the other end. And I got up to 209. And that's not that's not a healthy weight. And so I started going back to church. My mom had been going to my childhood church, but I was too embarrassed because of everything that had happened, and I was overweight. But I finally ended up going because my son had a Christmas program, and then I decided, you know what? I'm just going to go because I need God. So I went, and then Celebrate Recovery came a couple times after that. to do Life's Healing Choices. It was like a 6-week study. Yeah. And I was with these women, including in church, who had problems like mine. But everybody was just so loving. And I wasn't used to that. I was like, I'm so depressed, and I'm overeating, and I'm sure there's other stuff too, but I need other people. And so there was this one girl who had been through rape and overcome, as far as you can, and was doing so well. And she was one of the leaders. And I said, will you please sponsor me? And so she said, well, I want you to pray about it. So I did. And so that became my sponsor. I started CR that Monday. I asked the former ministry leader then if I could have the step study books, a Bible, and when was the next step study, because I was ready. I was ready to be different. And I completed it, found out what codependency was. Never heard of that. I'm like, oh, wow, that's totally me right there. And that the eating was just a symptom, which they had said before, but they didn't say how you found the underlying stuff, right? I'd been through therapy, but then my sponsor's like, you need to try trauma therapy because I went through it and I really think that you need to. And because after I read my 4th step and she heard everything, she's like, I recommend it. She's like, of course I can't tell you what to do, but I think you'd really benefit. So I was a little stubborn for a little while, but I did start 3 years ago, trauma therapy, and it really has helped. And then I have now led 3 step studies and completed 4. I became ministry leader a couple of years ago. And I am a sponsor. I have some amazing sponsees who I learn a lot from too. And so, yeah, I'm not the same, I'm not the same anymore.
Wow. What an amazing story, Tyra. Thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared. I was reading the other day, Proverbs 4:23, and it says, above all else. And whenever the Bible says above all else, it kind of makes your ears perk up a little bit. But above all else, guard your heart, for everything flows from it. So I want to ask you, how do you guard your heart? Because you've had your heart broken multiple times. You've had so much hurt, so many things happen in your life. How do you guard your heart? And, how do you do that now? What are some of the things that you do to keep your heart safe?
I pray. I also ask people to pray for me. I ask God to protect my heart and to help me to fill my mind with things that are lovely, pure, righteous, holy, and also through trauma therapy, I've learned the automatic negative thoughts that I have for myself were awful, awful, awful. And that is causing me, to feel the way that I feel. A lot of it I'm doing, and it's so terrible to find that out, but so relieving, because then you can just turn that around and say, okay, I may not believe it right now, but I am a child of God. I am worthy. I was chosen. And, surround myself with other believers. I don't hang out in places that aren't healthy for me. I just try to remember that God's in control and that he wants what's best for me. So I try to do what's best for me too.
Tyra, thanks so much for sharing the rest of your incredible story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you have experienced trauma in your life, it may be from a long time ago, or it may be a recent event. Whichever the case, there is healing from your trauma. God cares deeply for you, and if you will only let Jesus Christ into this area of your life, you can experience healing and peace, just like Tyra. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time. Are there any scriptures that you cling to or that mean a lot to you and help you through your daily life?
Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For I, the Lord, am with you wherever you go.
Is change possible in your life?
Yes, absolutely. But I couldn't have done it without God. And I couldn't have done it without the people He placed in my life.
Hey, if you are still listening and you like this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.